Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah, we've got a really fun one for you today.
So this time we're kind of in the world of music and sound.
Yeah, specifically DJing and events, weddings, that kind of stuff.
So we came across this really fascinating discussion between a bunch of actual, like real deal professional DJs.
Like, these guys are out there doing it week after week, all kinds of
Yeah,
events.
they had this roundtable conversation all about sound systems.
Yeah, specifically thinking about weddings and how to really hit that sweet spot in terms of sound.
And, I guess the big question they kept coming back to is, how much sound is actually enough?
Yeah, because, you don't want to underpower it, but you also don't want to blast people out of the room.
Right, exactly.
Especially at a wedding where it's supposed to be, this kind of celebratory, fun atmosphere. You don't want it to feel like a rock concert.
It's not a club.
No, exactly.
Yeah. So their conversation is I thought it was just so insightful because they're really coming at it from, years and years of experience.
Real world experience.
Yeah, and figuring out like what actually works to create that right vibe.
Right. And they started with this kind of like core scenario that I think a lot of people planning a wedding or really any event can probably relate to.
So let me lay it out. Imagine you've got a wedding reception, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's all happening in one room. So you've got your cocktail hour, speeches, dinner, and then, the dance floor opens up.
Okay, yeah.
And the guest count, let's say it's under 100 people.
All right, so not a huge wedding.
Yeah, more intimate, 35, 50, maybe up to 70 guests.
Okay, I gotcha.
And the central question they kept coming back to is, for a wedding of that size, in that kind of setting, do you really need a subwoofer?
Ah, okay. So, getting into the nitty-gritty of the sound system. Subwoofer or no subwoofer? That is the question.
Yeah, because, my initial instinct, and it sounds like this was shared by several of the DJs, is that for smaller events, like a subwoofer might be overkill
Okay.
because good quality, two-way speakers, like if you get something decent, like in the JBL PRX line or even their Eon series, I mean, those can really pump out a good amount of sound.
Right, and they're designed to handle a range of frequencies, not just those super low bass tones.
Exactly. So the thinking here is, first of all, you're avoiding that, like, audio overkill.
Yeah, you don't want to blast people out of their seats during dinner.
Right, especially during those parts of the event where conversation is key.
Cocktail hour, speeches, you want people to be able to actually hear each other.
Exactly. And then the second point, and, a subwoofer, what it's really designed for is to reproduce those really, really low frequencies, like down in the 30, 40 hertz range.
Yeah, like the stuff that you kind of feel more than you actually hear.
Right, that rumble. And they were saying, for most wedding music, you're probably not even hitting those frequencies that often. It's not like a club or a big EDM festival.
Right, where you need that intense chest-thumping bass.
Yeah, wedding music still has bass, but it's often sitting in a higher range that those two-way speakers can handle just fine.
Okay, that makes sense. So for a smaller, more intimate wedding, they're thinking maybe skip the subwoofer.
Yeah, unless, like, you specifically want that super heavy bass. But even then, I mean, you could probably just double up on your main speakers and get a similar effect.
Okay, so that was kind of the initial consensus, but I'm guessing not everyone in the group agreed wholeheartedly.
Oh, no, definitely not. They all had different perspectives based on their experience and the kinds of events they typically do.
Right, because every DJ kind of has their own style and their own go-to equipment.
Exactly. So, for example, we heard from a DJ named Brentley, and he had a pretty clear, it depends stance.
Okay, so not a hard and fast rule for him.
Right. He really emphasized that the couple's own preferences, the music they want, like, that's got to be the driving factor.
Absolutely, makes sense.
He actually shared a story about doing a smaller wedding, around 60 people for the ceremony, and then like 35 to 40 for the dancing.
Okay.
And he used just Maui 5s.
Those are those Calamari speakers, right?
Yeah, they have like an 8-inch woofer built in, so they do have some bass response.
Right.
And he said it worked perfectly.
Okay, so for that event, no need for the extra subwoofer.
No, they had plenty of sound.
So how does he decide when a subwoofer is necessary then?
Well, he said even with a smaller group, if the couple requests music that's really bass heavy, like dubstep or EDM, then yeah, a subwoofer becomes essential.
Okay, so it really comes down to the music.
Yeah, because those genres, like they live in those low frequencies, you need that sub to really deliver that full sound.
Right, otherwise it's just not going to have that same impact.
Exactly. And he also mentioned that, like, as a general rule, if an event gets over 150 people, he pretty much always brings a full system with mains and subs, just to be safe.
Ah, okay, so kind of a safety net for bigger crowds.
Yeah, make sure you've got enough power no matter what.
Okay, that's interesting. So it sounds like communication with the couple beforehand is really key here.
Absolutely. Figuring out what they're envisioning, what kind of music they love, even the general age range of their guests. I mean, all of that can really guide your sound system choices.
Right, because if you've got a younger crowd that's really into EDM, you're probably going to need more bass than, say, a wedding with a mostly older crowd who might prefer more mellow music.
Totally. So yeah, that pre-event conversation is crucial.
All right, so we've heard from Brentley. What about some of the other DJs?
Okay, so then we heard from Pete, and he actually had a pretty different approach.
Oh, really? How so?
He said he pretty much never uses subwoofers.
Wow, okay. Even for larger weddings.
Yeah, even for weddings up to like 150 people,
Interesting. So what's his strategy then?
he just doubles up on the main speakers if he needs more volume.
Ah, so just more of the same speakers instead of adding a subwoofer.
Yep, exactly. He also had good experiences with those Maui 5s for smaller events, like
Yeah.
130 or less.
Okay, so those seem to be popular for smaller weddings.
Yeah, and for ceremonies too. He actually liked that they have a built-in SPL limit.
Oh, what's that?
So SPL stands for sound pressure level,
Okay.
and it's basically a measure of how loud a speaker can get. So the Maui 5s, they have a limit of 120 SPL,
Okay.
and Pete found that to be a helpful kind of governor, to prevent him from pushing the system too hard.
Oh, I see. So it kind of keeps things at a reasonable volume, even if he gets carried away.
Right, exactly. And he actually shared this story about attending a wedding as a guest where the bass from the subwoofers was just way too loud.
Oh, no.
Yeah, he said it was so overpowering that he could barely understand the announcements.
That's not good.
It really threw off the balance of the sound.
Right, because you want the music to be enjoyable, but you also need to be able to hear the important stuff, like speeches and announcements.
Exactly. And that really highlighted, I think, for all the DJs, the importance of that balance in the sound.
Yeah, you don't want any one frequency to dominate the mix.
Okay, so moving on, we heard from Matt, who had another interesting perspective.
Okay, what did Matt have to say?
So he mentioned using these bass reflex 15-inch top speakers.
Bass reflex, what's that?
So it's basically a design that helps the speaker produce more bass naturally without needing a separate subwoofer.
Ah, okay, so built-in bass boost.
Yeah, exactly. And he uses a specific brand called Stingers, and he finds those work really well for smaller weddings or venues where sound might travel easily to neighboring areas.
Oh, I see. So it's kind of a way to get good bass without having it be too overpowering.
Right, and he also considers the room itself. Like he mentioned that in venues with lots of hard surfaces, like brick, the bass can actually get amplified and bounce around more.
Oh, interesting. So the room can almost act like a natural subwoofer.
Yeah, exactly. So in those cases, he might choose to skip the subwoofer even more often, especially for smaller events.
Okay, that makes sense. So he's really thinking about the acoustics of the space.
Right, but he was also clear that for bigger events and for his higher-end packages, he always includes subwoofers.
Okay, so for him, it's kind of a scale thing. Smaller events, maybe not. Bigger events, definitely.
Yeah, and he agreed that bringing like a huge dual 18-inch subwoofer to a wedding with 35 people would be ridiculous.
Yeah, that would be way overkill. Okay, so we've heard about the single speaker options. We've heard about just bringing a bunch of mains. What about some of those newer all-in-one systems, like those column arrays? Did anyone talk about those?
Yeah, so Jeff, he actually really likes using Maui 28 Gen 2s for smaller weddings, like up to almost 100 people.
Okay, and those have decent bass response on their own.
Yeah, so they actually have dual 8-inch woofers built into the bass unit.
Okay, that's pretty good for a column array system.
Right, and then they also have a line array of 16 smaller 3-inch mid-range drivers.
So it's like a combination of bigger woofers for the low end and then lots of smaller speakers for the mids and highs.
Yep, and he finds that combination gives plenty of sound and decent bass without needing a separate sub.
Okay, interesting. So those column arrays, it sounds like they can be a good option for smaller events where you want good coverage and decent bass without having to bring a ton of equipment.
Yeah, exactly. And they're also a lot more compact and easier to set up than traditional speakers and subwoofers.
Right, which can be a big plus for DJs who are often working solo.
Okay, so moving on to Chris. He really doubled down on the idea that subwoofers are often unnecessary for smaller events.
Okay, so he's in the less is more camp.
Yeah, he actually had a pretty strong opinion about it.
Really? How so?
He talked about how too much bass can actually be really unpleasant for people.
Oh yeah, I've definitely been to events where the bass was just way too loud.
Right. And he mentioned things like headaches and just like an overall negative impact on the sound quality.
Yeah, when the bass is too loud, it can muddy everything else up. You can't hear the vocals clearly. The instruments get lost. It's just a mess.
Exactly. And he also echoed Pete's point about the importance of clear, well-rounded sound.
Right, because as a DJ, your job is to create a sonic experience that's enjoyable for everyone.
Yeah. And he brought up the issue of DJs sometimes not setting up their microphones correctly, adding too much bass to the vocals, which can really make the sound muddy.
Oh yeah, that's a pet peeve of mine too. Like, I don't need to hear the efficient's voice booming through the subwoofer.
Right, exactly.
So is Chris totally against subwoofers then?
Well, he didn't say that explicitly, but he definitely emphasized the potential for them to overpower a smaller space.
Okay, so use them judiciously.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Dwayne offered a slightly different perspective.
Okay, what did Dwayne have to say?
So he said that whether or not he uses a subwoofer depends less on the number of people and more on the kind of effect the couple wants and the size of the room.
Okay, so it's more about the overall vibe and the space itself.
Yeah, he said he might use a subwoofer even with column arrays if he's playing EDM or hip-hop for a younger crowd that wants that strong bass.
Okay, so he's willing to adapt to the audience's preferences.
Right. But he would avoid it for an older audience or in a smaller room where it would be too overwhelming.
Right, because you don't want to blast grandma out of her chair during the first dance.
Exactly. And finally, we heard from Hunter, who takes a pretty firm stance against subwoofers, period.
Oh, wow, really? Even for outdoor events or larger venues?
Yep, even then. He prefers to use his mixer and JBL Eon 612 speakers, and he feels like that gives him enough power and versatility.
Okay, so he's found a setup that works for him and he sticks with it.
Yeah, and he mentioned that the venues in his area tend to be small to medium size, so those 12-inch top speakers are usually sufficient.
Right, and he also has to be mindful of local noise ordinances.
Yeah, if the volume gets too high, he could get in trouble.
So it sounds like there's no one right answer to the subwoofer question.
Exactly. It really depends on a lot of factors, like the couple's preferences, the music, the venue, the guest list. All of that comes into play.
Right, and it's up to the DJ to use their expertise and experience to make the best call for each individual event.
But even though they had different approaches, some key takeaways about sound and DJing really emerged from their conversation.
Yeah, what were some of those?
So one thing that kept coming up was the importance of balance.
Balance in the sound, you mean?
Yeah, making sure that no one frequency is overpowering the others.
Right, because if the bass is too loud, it can drown out the vocals and the other instruments.
Exactly. And they talked about this idea of a DJ's sound floor and how being exposed to loud music for long periods of time can actually change your perception of what a comfortable listening level is.
Oh, interesting. So, like, you get used to the loudness and you start turning it up without realizing it.
Yeah, exactly. So they really stress the importance of using sound meters, whether it's an app on your phone or a dedicated device, to keep an eye on the decibel levels, especially during those quieter parts of the event, like cocktail hour and dinner.
Right, because you don't want people to have to shout to hear each other over the music.
Exactly. And they also mentioned that it's helpful to get feedback from others, like a partner or an assistant, just to make sure the mix sounds good to someone who's not standing right next to the speakers.
Yeah, because your own perception can definitely be skewed after you've been listening to loud music for a while.
Right. And then some of the DJs talked about using floor monitors, especially for larger events.
Oh, yeah, those are the speakers that point back towards the DJ, right?
Yep. And that helps them hear what the audience is hearing, which is important for making sure the mix is balanced.
Right, because they're not always standing in the same spot as the guests.
Yeah.
So all of this really highlights the expertise that goes into DJing, right? It's not just about picking songs and pressing play.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's about understanding sound, acoustics, equipment, and really reading the crowd and the vibe of the event.
Right, because ultimately you're creating an experience for people.
Yeah, and a good DJ can really make or break an event.
I think it's interesting, too, how they talked about the different formats they've used over the years.
Oh, yeah. That was a fun little tangent.
Like, you started out with vinyl, right?
Yeah, me and Brettley and Pete.
And then Jeff was on cassettes.
Yep. And then eventually everyone moved to CDs and MP3s.
Right, and they all had their own unique challenges and quirks.
Yeah, like beat matching on vinyl. That was a whole skill in itself.
I can imagine. I've never even touched a turntable.
It's a different world.
It makes you wonder how those early experiences might still influence their DJing today, even if it's in subtle ways.
Totally. So I guess the biggest takeaway for anyone listening who's planning an event, especially a wedding, is that there's no magic formula when it comes to sound.
Right. It's not just about getting the biggest, loudest system.
Yeah, it's about choosing a system and setting it up in a way that's appropriate for the space, the music, and the people.
And it's about prioritizing that balance and clarity in the sound.
Exactly. Because ultimately you want people to be able to enjoy the music, hear each other, and have a good time.
Right. It's all about creating the right atmosphere.
Yeah. Okay, so one last thought for you before we wrap up.
Okay. Hit me with it.
So,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about all these different approaches to DJing and sound systems and how music formats have evolved over the years, what do you think the future holds for DJing?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, technology is always changing.
Right. And Hunter even mentioned VR DJing at one point.
VR DJing. What's that?
I don't know the details, but it sounds futuristic.
It does. So who knows what kind of crazy setups and technology we'll be seeing in the future.
Right. It's exciting to think about. Maybe holographic DJs.
Maybe DJs will be beaming their sets directly into our brains.
Who
The
knows?
possibilities are endless.
Yeah. It's a brave new world.
Well, on that note, I guess we'll leave it there for today.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of DJing and sound systems.
Yeah, hopefully you learned a thing or two and it gave you some food for thought.
Definitely. Until next time.